Hello, Rob Ainscough here again for Sim Horizon. I thought I'd go over part 2 of my tutorial on how to use seasons. In this part, we're going to go over the tools option here. And you don't actually need to have Microsoft Flight Simulator running in the background when you're operating this tools. So you can either minimize it, exit from it, or just continue as is, but it's not required to have Microsoft Flight Simulator running when I'm working with the tools here. And the tools, here it is. Click on tools and you get a fairly large, complicated looking window. And I'm going to go over what this grid here means. It has all the months in it, what the parameters do, and the various, you can have two different types of hemispheres, a northern and southern hemisphere. Currently that's not really supported in Microsoft Flight Simulator, but I try and work around that problem by creating the ability to have two separate season generator files, one for northern, one for southern. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start working with the season generator. And again, I put these green icons next to items that if you're not sure what they do, you should be able to click on that. In this case, it's a little bit high, so let's bring this down a bit. And that'll give you some information about what this particular option does. As you switch between these, if you switch to southern, you'll notice that the months change to a southern hemisphere, where June and July and August are actually winter months in the southern hemisphere. So the whole month organization here will change to match up to the hemisphere you select up here. So if we go back to say northern hemisphere, which is the default, you'll see that June, July, August are summer months, September, October, November, autumn, December, January, February are winter, March, April, May are spring. Go ahead and break up what this grid is presenting to you. So what seasons does here is you have a month, and then for each you have what I call a base. This is kind of like a starting point, a base color in which you want other months to perhaps reference as the base and adjust automatically based on that color. For this particular season set, I set the base at 0.7, 0.8, 0.7, which is actually a green color. That's the default green color, and it's called green 2. So as you go through each month here, I have what I call color adjustments. And up here we've got something that says deciduous, which basically means there's two types really of trees. I break it down to evergreens and deciduous. Deciduous are trees and a evergreen area. If you scroll the grid across here, and you'll eventually get to something called evergreens. And here's the evergreen section. And this is where you'd set the colors for evergreens and or whatever color adjustment actions you want to do. But let's go back to the beginning here. Yeah, like I said, there's two distinct elements here, deciduous and evergreens. Evergreens are not going to change much throughout the year. They're going to be what they suggest, always green. Deciduous or deciduous are they are going to change throughout as the seasons change, as the months change, as you move from summer, autumn, winter, spring. So what you can do here, I've broken up deciduous into several sub categories. I basically call them brown foliage, yellow foliage, red foliage, blue flowered, red flowered, and white flowered. Those are the 1, 2, 6 categories I break the deciduous up into. And what that means is I generate deciduous trees based on each one of these categories. and I'll generate their frequency with this ratio here. You can adjust the ratio on a month-by-month basis if you like, or you can just leave it static. The 0.7 here means it's a ratio. It's not technically 70%. So you can set the ratio on a month-by-month basis. 0.7 is obviously higher than, say, 0.1. So you'll get more frequency of brown foliage trees. Now, when I say brown foliage, what I'm really trying to represent here are trees that are either more brown in color during autumn, or even brown in color during any month of the year. But they essentially represent trees that are going to go from a green state to a brown state. So, and then the same for yellow foliage. That would be trees that either become yellow in spring, or as fall comes along, the leaves turn yellow and you get trees with yellow leaves. And then we have red foliage. Those are trees that, like a red maple, that will be a bright red in certain times of the year. You can go ahead and specify how many of those types of deciduous trees you want. Again, with the ratio here, and you can set the color specific to what I categorize as red foliage. Then we move on to blue flowered. Those would be trees that actually have flowered trees, like say a wisteria. It would be a very blue, purpley tree, and there's all kinds of other types of trees that might have blue flowers on them. You can define those and how much you want them to appear. They can sometimes look a little strange, because a blue tree in the middle of a bunch of brown and green trees can look sometimes a little odd, but that's why I have you can set the ratio here to really fine-tune exactly the frequency you want of these types of trees. Like 0.01 is in April would be a very limited frequency. You can certainly change that to whatever value you want. And then we have the red flowered over here, which would be trees that have like a red flower to them. And then we have white flowered trees. These are trees that would have a white flower to them, and you can control their frequency over here. As you can see from my default setup here, I don't have a lot of white flowered trees, I don't have a lot of red flowered trees, and I don't have a lot of blue flowered trees, and not too many red foliage either. Now this is just my preference to how I want to see the trees. Now you can set your ratio here to whatever you want. It could be any value you like. If you want a lot more yellow, you can go in here. You can say, okay, for June, I'm going to have 1.0 rather than 1.0. So that would give you a higher ratio of yellow trees, or whatever you define for that tree color in that particular month. So I'm going to put this back to 0.1. And okay, so that's the basic categories of trees. You've got 6 foliage/flowered trees under the deciduous group, and then you have the evergreen group, where there's not much of a variance in the evergreen group. There's basically one. Well, it's not one particular tree type, because there are several types of evergreens, and we'll get into those down here, where you can further control the ratio of evergreens to deciduous trees using this particular species ratio parameter list over here. So all right, so now we've covered the basic categories of how I represent trees. Now we'll get into the specific settings around color adjustment by month, and what the colors mean and their values over here. We have a column called color adjustment, color ADJ here, and that is something you set on a month-by-month basis. So like I mentioned before, we have a base, and this is like a base color from which to start your color sequencing from. And 0.7, 0.8, 0.7 is a green color. So if I click on green 2 here, this will bring up a sample of what green 2 is. And you'll see a whole bunch of different colors here. Green 2 is actually off the screen here, so we can scroll over. And we'll see a little check mark here. This is by green 2. So that's what the base color is going to be. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, they also use the same base color, 07, 08, 07 for green trees. So that's our base color. I'm not going to change it. I'm just going to hit X to exit that. Now, if you wanted to change a base color, that's certainly more than possible. You can go ahead and click on base color and say, oh, you know what, I'd like the green to be a bit, let's make it green 1 instead of green 2 or something like that. Now you notice as soon as I select green 1, the colors over here change. That's specific to green 1. I can go ahead and create my own custom colors if I wanted to. And when I do that, let's say I want a little bit more green in it, so I go to 0.52. When I do that, that's going to actually change the color over here to custom, because it's not one of the predefined color sets. And you also notice that the colors for the months June, July, and August also changed to custom. Now here's why. When I change a color here, let's say I'll go back to say green 1. I hit OK. And my 3 greens here change. Now the reason these change color from the prior color is due to the color adjustment setting over here. In the color adjustment setting, there is various options from which you can indicate what these values over here actually mean relative to the color for this particular month. When you select none, it's basically telling the seasonal color algorithm to do nothing with the color from the prior month. And that's why we have this green 1 here, because it's actually a reflection of the prior month. So this is a good way to quickly change colors in the season using small values here, just to make small tweaks and adjustment to any particular color based on the prior month's color. And as you know, in seasons, the way they tend to operate, they go in a cycle. You know, it's month after month after month. They'll be green in summer, and they'll slowly, gradually become brown or yellow in fall, and then they'll turn to leafless, maybe dark brown trees in winter, and then spring the green will start coming back again. So it's that flow of color change is what this entire grid here is trying to represent. That none 000 means it's basically nothing is going to change. So this will be the color for June will be whatever the base color is set to here. And let's go to July. I've got a plus minus. Well, what does that mean? Okay. On our list, we've got quite a few items to choose from here, but let's go over what plus minus means. Plus minus means it'll take the prior month's color, green 1, that's why you see green 1 here, and it will modify that prior month's red, green, and blue values by a plus or minus 0.1 for the red, a plus or minus 0.2 for the green, a plus or minus 0.1 for blue. And what that does, it just gives you a little bit of variance from month to month. So going from June to July, the tree may change a little bit in its color shape. So as you fly any particular month, you'll have a slightly different variation of greens. So it adds some interest to the world of vegetation in Microsoft Flight Simulator. As we go to month August here, we're still at plus minus. So it's using the prior month's green value, and it's got a green one here, which is the prior month, and then this has again its own plus or minus values. So it'll adjust the prior month's number by plus or minus 0.1. So in this particular case, if the prior month number is 0.85, which it would be since there's no change here, and it will do this in a random basis. So suppose I said, okay, I'm going to change the number, the prior month, by 0.05. So it would add 0.05 to 0.085, and you'd come up with 0.9. So the actual color that will be represented in the month file of July will be 0.9. And this 0.2 is similar. It's you have a plus or minus random number from minus 0.2 to plus 0.2. So let's suppose that random number ends up being a minus 1.8, for example. You take that minus 0.18, and then you would add that to the 0.48 here, which would give you a value for green of 0.3. And then you do the same thing for blue. This will say plus or minus 0.1. So it would randomly pick a value between negative 0.1 and positive 0.1. And then whatever that random value is, it would then either apply it to the 0.9 value. So if it's a negative, it will decrease it. If it's a positive, it will increase it. So you can, by changing these values, if I say green here, let's say I give it a value of 0.5, which is quite a lot. What that would do is it would allow the randomness of this particular 0.48 value to be increased either by 0.5 or negative 0.5. So you may get a wider range of color change. Now, if you don't like too much of a change in color, you can set these to 0. You can set them to 0.1 or 0.2 or whatever value you like to minimize the change in color. Or if you prefer more of a variance, then you can increase these values and give you a wider range of colors. And then you're asking, well, why am I doing this? Well, the answer is when you come to run the season generator down here, it's going to take all these values you've plugged in and calculate the necessary color values for the vegetation for that particular month, and it'll go through every single month and generate a whole complete set of seasons for you. The caveat here is that these seasons will override whatever your current seasons are that you had prior to going into the seasons generator, and it warns you about that. I do make a backup of your prior ones. I think I keep a history of about 30. So just in case there's any issues or you want to revert back to an older one, you can. Okay, so we've covered plus minus. There are some restrictions. When you have plus minus selected here, you're not going to actually be able to change the color here because it's not really relevant, because what you're doing is you're changing an offset to the prior month's colors. So that's why some of these items you can't actually change this color. It's the based you can change color, fixed you can change color, and if you have let me see, fixed mix will allow you to change color as well. What does fix mean? Fix is basically saying, okay, the color for this particular season, this particular month, is going to be based on whatever color you set here. It will not be based on the prior months. It's just going to be based on the color you set here. So in this case, you can now click on the brown 5 here, and you'll be presented with a checkbox next to the color brown 5, and that's a sample of what it would look like. If you don't like that brown 5, you can say, okay, I prefer a brown 6 kind of color, and select that and hit OK, and you're going to see brown 6 shows up. Now you notice this doesn't have any impact on months ahead of it because these are all fixed months, so that's not going to have any impact. because it's a fixed color, and you notice the color here changed to that color. And again, if you don't like that brown 6, or you want to just slightly tweak the color and make your own custom color, you can do that too. 0.25, and then this will change to custom. So it's still a fixed color, but it's just a custom color. Okay, so let's go to okay, next month. We've got more fixed colors here. We won't go over those. We've gone over the plus minus. We've gone over the fix again. We can go over some other options here rather than plus minus. If you want to do just plus, you can do that. What just plus means is that it'll take this value and it will increase the prior month by this amount. So if the prior month is 1.19, it's going to increase that by 0.05. So and that's not a random value, that's a plus or minus value. So it's not a range, it's going to just simply add this to this. So you're going to have 1.24 as your red color, and you're going to have 0.44 as your green color, and you're going to have 0.15 as your blue color. That's what plus would do. If you select minus here, minus will do what it indicates. It will reduce the prior month's color by 0.05. So if you have minus selected here, this is actually going to present a color of 1.14. It's reducing 1.19 by negative 0.05. And same for green. It's going to be 0.39 minus 0.5. So it's going to be 0.34. Same for blue. It's going to be 0.05. So it's going to be minus 0.05 from 0.1 is 0.05. So that's what the minus will do. And then with fix, we've gone over base. You really shouldn't use base anywhere other than the initial row entry. And they have something called fixed mix. What that will do is you can specify a color to whatever you like. Let's just say brown 7. And it's going to take your color you specified, and it's going to just randomly adjust it by an amount. It won't be based on any prior amount. It's just going to be that color slightly randomized by I believe by 0.2. Typically don't use this, but it's there in case people want to experiment with it. So you can proceed this way on month to month, doing if you want to do fixed, non-fixed. Typically in March I will do a fixed value, but by no means you're limited to that. You can do it based on the prior month if you want. However you want to, you can organize this in any way, in any kind of color action you like. The only caveat being that the first row you must have a base color. So that's how you can proceed with each month. And if you scroll over here, you just have the same options. You notice this freezes here. So if you want yellow foliage, like I've done in here, September, these are the trees that I think would turn yellow. And then I can set up a yellow color for them for September, October, and set up how frequent those yellow leaf foliage trees would appear. And then again, you can do the same sequence of things for red. And as you know, most of them start off green and they turn brown or reddish. I've got these mostly set to a type of brown. And then during the spring months, they'll turn to green again. So it's kind of green, brown, green. Same with the blue flowered, green, brown, blue flowered. Now you don't have to do it this way. You can set this up in any which way you like. I've provided a set of default colors for which you can select from. There's no restriction. These colors are actually defined in the advanced area. back in seasons, so you can add to these colors and create your own. You can add your own little screenshot of what the color looks like. There's a way to do that to make it appear. So you're free to expand this set of preset colors here. These are just the ones I've provided. So that's how you would basically proceed with red, green, white, flowered. And then they have what we call a mask color. The mask color is used to add a little bit of variance to the trees of the same species. So if you have deciduous trees, the mask will modify their look a little bit based on various times of day and sun and things like that. So it's a lot to do with the lighting and how you want those trees to vary in those particular lighting situations. I don't really change the mask values that much from those that Microsoft provided. You see I've made a few changes here for the deciduous ones. I recommend you experiment with these mask values. They follow the same color adjustment logic as we discussed for the regular colors, for the regular vegetation colors. They have the same options here, plus, minus, fixed, so you can go ahead and set up your own sequence of how you want to adjust the mask colors based on the grouping and lighting. I mean, they're mostly effective with the time of day and the grouping, but experiment with them, see what you like, and see what works for you. There's another option for the deciduous. It's called frames adjustment, and the frames adjustment is actually representing the bushiness of a tree. The default, 0 means basically I'm not going to touch the Microsoft value of the frames adjustment. I'm going to leave it at 0. But there are sometimes, like maybe as it starts getting towards autumn, you want to reduce the bushiness of a tree, so you can set the frame adjustment here to a negative value, and as you can see from month to month here, I set -1. I'll set the frame to -2 for October, -3 November, -4 December, which is just changing the tree's number of branches or bushiness to the tree to make it look a bit thinner. That's what the frame adjustment will do. And as you see, summer months I don't touch them. As it gets towards winter, I make them thinner and thinner and thinner, and then spring comes along, they go back up to their full bushiness. Now let's go ahead and move on to evergreens. So here we are in the evergreens category up here, and here's the evergreen ratios I've got set up 0.5. So in this particular season's generator, I've got more deciduous than I have evergreens, but there are other factors that influence that, and one of them will be the ecoregions, and I'll get into that later. So I'm setting up my deciduous here. Basically they're all color 2. I've got a lot of different greens. You can experiment with different greens, but for the most part, I use the color adjustment method to add some variant from the base. So and then I use a plus here to say, okay, it's getting towards August, let's just perhaps maybe make them a little bit darker and less green or something like that, which is what this is kind of doing here. Minus will be a random value between the range you specify here, and then that way you can give your evergreens, even though they're always green, they do vary from month to month, and they'll still all be, well, they don't have to be, but they'll all be green, but they'll just be changing a little bit differently from month to month. So that's what this process for the evergreens is about. And again, I have the mask color for the evergreens, and these are primarily operating how the tree looks over a grouped area during specific periods of time during the day. You can experiment with these. Highly encourage you. Like I said, in my case, I just use green 2 all the way down. You don't have to do that. You can make them all kinds of different types of green. There's no restrictions. Just be aware that if you click on this and you don't get the color screen, that's because you're at plus minus here. So if you wanted a different green, you either need to be at the base, and then you'd get the ability to change to a different green. Let's say I go with a dark green, for example. Then all these are going to change to 10, to brown 10, because they're all plus minus. They're all non-fixed values. If any of these were fixed, they wouldn't have changed, and they would have stopped. So that's the setting of the green for the evergreen green. So like I said, it's extremely powerful, and it's kind of difficult to kind of understand at first what this is trying to accomplish. But what it is essentially really trying to do is provide a set of seasons that will go from green to brown to green. Or in the case of trees that are yellow leaf trees, they may go from green to yellow to brown to green again. Okay, so we've covered this grid more or less and what it does. Now we have some additional parameters you can use to further enhance your selections you've made up here. Some of those parameters here are I allow you to change the ratio, which is essentially the frequency, but it's a ratio relative to other trees, so that's why it's called a ratio. So it's not a direct frequency. You can change the ratio of trees at a global level here. So if, say, for example, you were in a particular region where they had deciduous trees, or eco-region biome, where they had deciduous trees, and you wanted just more deciduous trees, you could put in 0.5 here. So what this will do is it will go and look at your deciduous values up here, and it's going to apply to all your deciduous values. So if you have 0.7 here as your ratio, and you have 0.5 here, it's basically going to add 0.5 to 0.7, so you're going to end up with 1.2, and it's going to add 0.5 to the 1.0 here, so you can have 0.6, and so on down the line. And this is for just the deciduous trees. It will not make any changes to evergreen values because they're not evergreen trees. And the same for deciduous small. If you have small trees, deciduous small being a set of smaller deciduous trees, and you want to increase the frequency of those, or if you want to decrease the frequency of those, you can set this to like negative 0.3. Negative 0.3. And that will go through and it will reduce your the small deciduous trees by 0.3. It'll always reduce them down to the lowest value, which would be 0, which is essentially none. And conversely, if you say, okay, conifer cool, and conifer boreal, these are evergreens, and I want to see a lot more evergreens present, then you can crank this up to say 1.3. What that will do is it'll go to your evergreen values over here, and it will add to the 0.5 here, giving you 1.8. And like I said, these are all ratios. They're ratios relative to other vegetation, so they're going to distribute as a ratio. But the rule of thumb is the higher you go, the more frequent that particular species will be. And what this does, Flight Simulator, Microsoft Flight Simulator currently only supports 14 actually types of trees. There are 17 listed here, but vineyards are currently, they don't render correctly. So I've got them here. I'm hoping that gets fixed. But vineyards they render as like these spherical blobs. They don't look like any kind of tree. It's more like a balloon. And they have letters and numbers on them. Look like they're indicating their sizes. So vineyards I would basically ignore for now until Microsoft fix them. Orange tree, olive tree, these aren't actually represented correctly either. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, these are basically leafless trees. So an orange tree, if you want to increase the frequency of leafless trees, you can go ahead and bump this number up. I only present these trees, leafless trees, in winter months. So in December, January, February, or if you're working with the southern hemisphere, that would be June, July, August would be the winter months. So that's the only time I present these trees, but you can increase their frequency if you like, and that'll apply it to the appropriate month, and you'll realize it in the appropriate month, the winter month. But these other species here, you can adjust them however you like and do whatever you want with them. Later on, when I go over the advanced features, there may be some additional species you add. That's entirely up to you. But just be aware that Microsoft visually only support 14 species. Orange tree and olive tree are just leafless and not really species in my opinion. So just be aware of that you're limited to 14 visually rendered species. Alright, so we covered the parameters over here. Let's go ahead and cover this section of parameters right here and what they do. If you notice, there's a little green icon next to each one of these. You can go ahead and click on those and it'll give you a good indication of what these parameters are doing. In this particular case, the size min offset and the size max offset are changing the default sizes either smaller or larger depending on what you want. So for example, a negative 0.7 here means the range of smaller trees is now increased. So a min size, suppose the original min size was say 5 for any particular tree. This is going to say, okay, well, I'm going to offset that 5 by negative 0.7. So now the minimum size is going to be 4.3. And if we did that with a maximum size also, I'm going to reduce them by negative 1.35. Suppose the maximum size for that particular species was 10. So now the maximum size is going to be reduced by 1.35. So then maximum size is now going to be 8.65. So what these parameters will do globally to all species is they will reduce the size of them, or they'll increase the size of them, or they'll allow a greater range of size differences. So if, for example, I were to move this to a negative 3 and then increase this to a 2.2 or a 3 like that, what I'm effectively doing on a global level is increasing the range of different tree sizes. I'm also allowing trees to be much taller, and I'm allowing trees to be much shorter. So if you want to manage tree sizes, that's how you can do it. If you wanted to just make all trees smaller, then you could just go down and set these to negative values, and that's basically setting all trees to be smaller. I know there's a lot of people think the trees are too large in Microsoft Flight Simulator, so this would be a good option to globally make those trees smaller. So let's move on to scrub spacing offset. So we have a value of 0.15 here. And again, if you click on the help thing, it'll give you a little indication of what the scrub spacing offset is about. What it does is, if you have higher values for the scrub vegetation, it will make the vegetation closer together. And this is applying only to scrub type vegetation. And scrub is kind of the miscellaneous underlying brushes and bushes and things like that. So the scrub vegetation, if you want it to look much more bunched up, you can increase this value. It will push the vegetation together. Or you can reduce this value and it will spread the vegetation out so it doesn't look so bunched up. So rural density offset will either increase or decrease the frequency of vegetation within a particular rural density. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, they have these biomes and biome cities, and they are set up for various ecoregions. So what you can do is you can increase the density in a non-city region, or you can, which is what I would call a rural region, or you can go over to the city's density offset and you can increase or decrease this to increase the density of trees within the city, or reduce the density of trees in the city. So you can kind of manage your density from a rural to city perspective. Stiffness offset is managing the, if you look at the help here, it's managing how the vegetation responds to wind. And this is a global setting, and it's a global offset. So you can, if you want to increase vegetation stiffness or reduce the stiffness, which is basically how the vegetation is going to react to wind, you can do that through this setting here. And there are a couple of more stiffness settings here. The stiffness offset vineyard is not being used right now, just like I said, because the vineyard's rendering isn't currently working with Microsoft Flight Simulator, so this particular value isn't going to have much of a change, but I left it in just in case Microsoft do actually address this issue or fix it. But for the stiffness offset per increment, you're probably wondering what the heck does that mean. The idea is that if the vegetation is taller, it's a longer, taller tree, it will be less likely, it'll be more stiff and less likely to be flexible. So what you're doing here is you're setting up that ratio of the tree stiffness based on its size. So and this is saying what increment is like saying what size increment do I change the stiffness at. So there's a little readme on the help here. It gives you an idea of how this is calculated. It takes the average size of the vegetation divided by this particular value that you specify here, and then multiplied by the stiffness average size offset value. Basically, these two values work together in determining the stiffness based on tree size. Okay, so that covers these parameters here. Next, we'll go on to the ecoregion biome source. Okay, so let's go over the ecoregion biome source. What I've done here is I've allowed you to import biome ecoregion data from different sources. You don't have to rely on the assignments that Microsoft make for your biome or ecoregions. A biome typically will have, in Microsoft, will have an ecoregion associated to a biome, and there may be many ecoregions associated to any particular biome. What I've done here is ecoregion biome source. I have a import feature where you can import your own ecoregion and biome data. That data can be available from multiple sources. There's Resolve online, and it may be more accurate and or more recent than the data Microsoft provide. In my case, I have data from a Resolve source that I'm using for biome and ecoregion mapping. There's a specific format for that data. I currently support CSV SHF are my own proprietary files, and XML. So if you would like to import your own data for the mapping of biomes and ecoregions, that is possible. I'm using, like I said, Resolve 2017 data, and if someone needs to know the exact format to use for those, I can certainly provide those, and they will lay out how you need to present that data so that it can be imported into my Seasons product. So I replace all the Microsoft mapping of biomes and ecoregion data with my own data I got from Resolve. So it's very flexible in that area. As ecoregion information gets updated yearly, you can add additional data sources and regenerate your entire season set based on these particular biome ecoregion mapping. Okay, so that covers pretty much all the parameters here. Now we have once you've made all these adjustments, it's most likely you're going to want to save them. And when you hit save, it's going to save the file specific to the hemisphere you're working with. So there are basically two hemispheres, so there'll be two files you'll be working with. And when you switch between hemispheres, you'll see that the files switch also. The data switches also. So you need to be aware that when you're saving this, you're saving it for this particular hemisphere. Just be cognizant of that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch to, say, Southern. And I'm going to say, okay, I want to create the seasons for the Southern Hemisphere. And you can enable logging output if you like. Not really necessary, only if you're running into some issues. But click on the Generate Seasons button here. And you should see you get prompted. This will overwrite your existing seasons, months, presets. Please confirm you want to save and generate seasons. This is just letting you know that if you've made changes via the advanced options on my seasons product, not the seasons generator here, but via my advanced options, then those will be overwritten for the 12 months of January through December. I do make a backup. So I'm going to say, yeah, okay, go ahead, make the seasons, and you'll see it'll generate the seasons here. I've got a little output list here. It's kind of small because I was running out of space, but you can scroll down through here and it'll show you that it's generated all the months. And now you can you can close this with the close button here. So we've created the season set for the Southern Hemisphere. So we can go ahead and click Apply to Microsoft Flight Simulator and just get prompted, say yes. So now we've created that season set in Microsoft Flight Simulator. I'll leave this to auto month on. And let's go ahead and go into do a flight, and let's go ahead and pick a location that we know is in the Southern Hemisphere. Let's say, for example, Fact, which is Cape Town. We'll pick Fact. I'm going to change the time to a day. Okay. And I'll go ahead and set as departure. I'm in my cub. And I'm going to say, that sounds great. I'm going to hit the fly. Now, since we've generated seasons for the Southern Hemisphere, and it is July, and we're in the Southern Hemisphere, we should now see trees that are more winter-like. Okay, so I'm here in Cape Town in South Africa. It is Southern Hemisphere, so it's July, and it should be their winter months. Let's go ahead and do a quick flight around here. Alright, so here's all the leafless winter trees around Cape Town. As you can see, they're quite dark and very wintry. I'm sure that's a technical term. So there's, this is a case of using the southern hemisphere trees to match up. The southern hemisphere season to match up with the southern hemisphere. So this concludes the not so short tutorial on my seasons generator. It is a fairly powerful tool, complicated tool, but with a little practice and time, you can probably get quite a nice, perfect looking set of seasons for whichever hemisphere you prefer to fly, either north or south. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and please visit www.simhorizon.com and go ahead and test out my product. I think you'll find it can open up a whole new world of vegetation and generate seasons for you to your liking. Thank you.